Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with me, Sydney Timmins. And today I am extremely happy and pleased to welcome back the Secret Psychiatrist.
Hi everybody, I'm the Secret Psychiatrist. A little bit about me if you don't know. I'm a psychiatrist in London, working in the NHS within psychiatry. And I write some articles on my website, and you can also find me, as well as my website, which is thesecretpsychiatrist.com, on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And I'll put a link to all of those in the show notes so that you can just easily click through and don't have to worry too much about finding it on Google, although Google at the moment is my best friend.
Don't we know it?
Sorry. So today's episode is going to be about depression, and this is as a result of us reading 13 Reasons Why. Now, if you listen to our discussion on 13 Reasons Why, you'll probably have realised that there was actually quite a lot to talk about. Also, if you have seen, there was a lot of media attention when the Netflix original series came out about 13 Reasons Why, and I think we're going to probably tackle some of that stuff as we talk today with the Secret Psychiatrist. But just in case you need a recap, I will give you the synopsis of the book. And so it says, you can't stop the future. You can't rewind the past. The only way to learn the secret is to press play. Clay Jensen returns home from school to find a strange package with his name on it lying on his porch. Inside he discovers several cassette tapes recorded by Hannah Baker, his classmate and crush, who committed suicide 2 weeks earlier. Hannah's voice tells him that there are 13 reasons why she decided to end her life. Clay is one of them. If he listens, he'll find out why. Clay spends a night crisscrossing his town with Hannah as his guide. He becomes a first-hand witness to Hannah's pain, and as he follows Hannah's recorded words throughout his town, what he discovers changes his life forever. So, this makes me a little bit worried. So this is a book that is aimed at teenagers. It is looking really at depression, I feel. Although Hannah isn't diagnosed officially with depression, I think as a result of the things that happened to her, it kind of all builds up and she finds that she can't take it anymore and she does then take her own life. But some of the things in here I think we need to address because I do worry about some of the messages that this book sends out.
And I think you said it's now a series, so it's quite relevant at the moment for people watching as well.
Yeah, I think that you can get this particular series on Netflix. There are 13 episodes, and I don't know, I haven't actually watched it myself. I've read the book. Becky was the one that watched it. My plan is to now watch it now that we've talked about both the book and the TV series. But basically, it kind of sends the message that if you do commit suicide, you can then, in some ways, have this act of revenge by telling all the people that impacted you that they kind of had a role to play in your eventual decision. Which
quite controversial topics then.
Yeah, so it's very controversial. So I thought maybe you would be able to take us through depression, the treatments of depression, and then what some of the consequences of depression can be. I mean, we've got suicide. There's also issues of self-harm and what goes with depression that people should be aware of.
Great. So depression. Firstly, I think for me, I always personally see depression as almost like a mind cancer. It has an incredible, powerful way of really affecting one and one's well-being, so much so that, you know, it's one of the leading reasons for people having depression of committing suicide. So please take it very seriously. It's incredibly dangerous, I always say, for the mind, and just as dangerous as almost having a heart attack, I always see it as.
So depression is actually more serious than most people may think. I mean, I know it's pretty bad because I've been depressed myself in the past, but I didn't realise you could liken it to having something as serious as a heart attack. So can you tell me what depression is?
So having a depressive episode, you need to diagnostically have it for at least 2 weeks for it to be diagnosed. The symptoms are very broad. So some of them you might find, obviously, you have a depressed mood. So your mood, say your baseline, say 10 is very happy, 0 not. And say your baseline is normally, 5 or 6. But a depressed mood, that number will be severely decreased. So it might be a 1 or a 0 consistently for 2 weeks. You will have something called anhedonia. So that means your loss of interest. So that might be you really enjoy hockey, and because of your depressive episode, you no longer enjoy that thrill of having hockey, and playing hockey. You might also have fatigue, very, very tired. You might have insomnia, so you're unable to sleep, or you might have hypersomnia, you sleep too much. You might feel very worthless within yourself. You might have guilt-like symptoms, so feeling incredibly guilty about things that objectively might not even be your fault. You might have difficulty concentrating on things. You might have suicidal ideations, which means you're thinking about suicide. You might be thinking about self-harm and how to end it, have plans or intentions to commit suicide. And your appetite might be decreased, so you're not feeling hungry, okay?
I certainly have issues with sleep. Is there any chance you could go into a bit more detail about the impact that a depressive episode has on sleep?
Now, certain sleep studies show you might have a delayed sleep onset. You might have a decreased REM latency. What that means is the time between falling asleep to your first, and there's something called REM cycle, to your first REM cycle period is decreased. You also might have increased REM sleep. So the actual cycle of REM is increased. So you might have more increased chances of having nightmares and dreams. Functional neuroimaging, for those interested as well, suggests that there's a decrease in activity of anterior brain structures and decrease in regional cerebral blood flow. So that might go hand in hand, because the frontal lobe is sort of your personality and it can affect your mood. So that might explain why having decreased in these areas might have decreased mood, for example.
Can I ask, are there any different theories associated with how depression is formed and what depression actually is?
So the psychoanalytical theories basically think that depression is a turning inward of aggression to yourself and hostility towards yourself. Now, the Bowley theory is that depression viewed is an end result of absent or disrupted attachment. So according to attachment theory, people have innate tendency to seek attachment, and failure to do so can lead to dissatisfaction, possibly leading to depression. So these are just psychological theories.
That's really interesting. So what can you tell us about the treatments for depression?
Now, one of the main, there's lots of different treatments. So you can have sort of forms of mild depression, moderate and severe. If it's mild, we tend to lean towards cognitive behavioural therapy. If it's moderate, you can have cognitive behavioural therapy plus minus medication. And if it's severe, we'd be really thinking about medication at this point. But specifically with cognitive behavioural therapy concerning depression, it identifies 3 levels of cognitive dysfunction. So I'll go into all 3 of them. 1, this is a summary, negative automatic thoughts. So what that means is you have a cognitive distortion. I'll give you examples. So one might be a distortion of you're catastrophic in your reaction. So you might think, I'll give an example. My son is smoking. Now he's a drug dealer. He's going to go to prison. So that's catastrophic thinking. Yeah. Okay. You might also have abstract thinking, and that means you're not looking at the evidence in front of you. For example, my husband's cheating on me. There's absolutely no evidence of it. You're assuming that because he's just gone to work. So there's no evidence of that. There might be also, for example, and these are loads of different examples, a selective abstraction. So you only focus on something. So if I relate that to depression, I failed my exam because of my depression. Now I'm going to fail everything in life and be homeless. So you're focusing on one thing that you have failed, and that's all you're focusing on. So I failed that, and you're not looking at everything else you've achieved. Okay, so that's selective abstraction. The second thing is conditional assumptions. So, for example, you say things like, I must do this, I must do that. So certain rules you have for yourself. And the third thing that the CBT identifies is the basic core beliefs. So some people call the schemas. So essentially what that is, it's an appraisal of yourself. So I am I am useless, I am a loser. It's like labeling yourself. I am not worth anything special. So these 3 areas are really looked on in detail when you have depression. So I'm going to give you an example. Say I'm depressed.
I hope not. Just saying.
No, it's just an example. I'm not depressed. Thank you for anyone who's
just
worried.
Checking.
Just checking. That's great. So it's an example. Say I'm depressed, and it's completely fictional, everybody, but I'm just putting it into CBT. So in CBT, you think about the cognitive, your behavior, and your sort of thought pattern as well. So I am depressed. So I'm going to give an example. I'm not depressed. I'm giving an example. So I am depressed, and I'm going to think I am useless. I am ugly, I don't deserve anything. Then my behavior might be, I'm not going to get out of bed today because I feel so worthless. No one will care anyway. So I don't get out of bed. Therefore, I don't eat, I don't shower, I don't go to work. And then it goes into your sort of thought pattern as well, and your mood, and that affects your mood. So then I feel worse about myself because I haven't got out of bed, and by the end of the day I've done nothing but stayed in bed. And then the cycle keeps going on and on and on in a circle, and it's not broken. So then the next day will be worse possibly, because then I think, yesterday I didn't even do anything, and then again I don't get out of bed, and then again I don't eat properly, and then I'm going on in my head maybe overthinking about how worthless I am, and then I think I am worthless because the evidence is I didn't get out of bed, and then my mood decreases, and it just goes round and round and round. So these are some of the things that you can be thinking when you're depressed, and it's important to think about each aspect. So say I'm now coming out of depression, and how that would help in CBT is, I think, right, I feel worthless, but I'm going to get out of bed. So you break something in that cycle. So I force myself out of bed, and even if I don't feel like it, I take a shower, I eat breakfast. Okay, and that's very simple, I understand, but just a simple behavior change.
Yeah, exactly.
It's small steps. Exactly. So it's a small change, a behavior, and then my mood will be slightly better than yesterday because I've got out of bed and I think, oh, I can do this. And then it will slowly increase, and then my thought pattern will be better because I'll think, okay, I did it today, so tomorrow I'm going to go outside for 5 seconds, just get a bit of fresh air or something. And then my behavior changes, and then my thought pattern changes, and my mood changes, and it all goes round and it slowly improves. But it's breaking that cycle.
Yeah.
And that's why CBT is so helpful. I want to touch on another quick theory as well, for those interested. There's a learned helpless theory, and that's
I love this
Seligman's theory. Oh, have you heard of it?
I have heard of this theory, and at times I do go, yeah, that I've learnt that.
Oh, tell me what you know about it.
So what I understand of learned helplessness is that you kind of learn that as a consequence of your actions, something else will occur, but it kind of reinforces what kind of is the thing that you don't want to do. So, for example, if I go to bed and I don't get out of bed, but then someone comes and looks after me and helps me out and stuff, and then I go, well, I'm going to do that again, because then I've learned and I've been reinforced that actually it's not such a bad thing. Is that what learned helplessness is?
It's essentially that is what it is. So
yes.
Yeah, exactly. So in this theory,
do a little dance now.
For you.
Do a little dance.
So it was seen in animals. So basically that there's some chronically, so it was seen in animals when this theory came about. So chronically stressed animals lose their capacity to essentially avoid stress. So they keep going this cycle of learned helplessness. So they keep doing the same thing. So you're just learning to be helpless and not doing anything about it, essentially. And I wanted to touch on something that many people might have not heard of. It's called depressive pseudo-dementia.
Definitely not heard of that.
So brilliant. So that's why I'm going to bring it. Yes, I'm teaching you something new today. So this is often seen in older adults. So when I say older adults, I mean essentially geriatrics, age of psychiatry. And depression in elderly patients can actually present as dementia clinically. So it can be difficult to distinguish, is it depression or is it dementia? Because you might have memory impairment, okay? And it's important to differentiate that. So when you're depressed and elderly, it can present as dementia, which is why it's called depressive pseudo-dementia, but it is not dementia. And how you can distinguish is it's different from dementia because the symptoms, so in depressive pseudo-dementia, the symptoms are much shorter duration, whereas in dementia it will be a long period of time you're having, your dementia symptoms. In pseudo-dementia, you'll have a history of previous psychiatric dysfunction of some sort, not necessarily so in dementia. In pseudodementia, you'll have attention and your concentration is relatively quite well preserved, whereas in dementia, that's not the case. And in pseudodementia, you'll be very focused on your symptoms, saying, you know, I feel this way and that way. Whereas in dementia, you don't really do that because you're grossly unaware that you have dementia, actually. And I wanted to touch on something with teenagers. So there's something called goth. So you have all these, you know, little names of subgroups out there. And there's the goth group. For people who don't know what that is, this is, again, sorry to be controversial, but essentially it's when you're kind of, how do I explain it? You wear quite dark clothes.
You're usually all in black. You look very pale. You have darkish hair, maybe with some colour in it. You are very much more pulling away from what society expects a teenager to be. You're kind of like this little nice subgroup of people that you tend to veer towards, like the heavy metal kind of music, and you might have piercings and a lot of tattoos and that kind of thing, depending on how old you are when you're going through, or still are. I mean, I know people that are still really identify as part of the goth community.
It always reminds me when you watch these films, like, you know, these high school films, and you look over, it's like the nerd group, the jocks group, and then you see a goth group and they like vampires and all that kind of thing. So it's that kind of group. So that's really a way to summarise it, the way you said it, actually. So the reason I mention it, in that particular group, there's 50% of those individuals that have suicidal ideation. Okay. And so that's, I mean, I don't know much about goths, but I thought that'd be interesting for any of you that know a goth or are a goth or see yourself as a goth or just interested anyway.
Was a goth. I was there.
So are there any social factors associated with people that suffer with depression?
So some of the social factors of depression, because it's a really big topic and lots of different theories. Okay, so this is really multivariate. You know, depression is not, people don't choose to be depressed. Okay, no one wants to be depressed. We all want to live in a very happy world, you know, utilitarianism. We all want to live in that wonderful world, but people don't choose to be this. And I get very cross when people judge others that, you know, they haven't come to work, they haven't done this, they're, you know, not helping themselves. I'm telling you now, from especially the patients I have seen, they don't choose this, okay? Sometimes it chooses them. Yeah. And you don't wake up and decide to be depressed. Nobody wants that life for anyone, especially for yourself. So some social factors I'll touch on. So one important factor is think about childhood. So there's a link that's been seen. This isn't the case with everybody. Again, it's just increased possible risk with certain individuals. So in childhood, if you've had a loss of a parent, childhood sexual abuse, perinatal alcohol problems or antisocial traits in your parents. Another thing to think about is life events that can increase the risk of depressive disorder, especially if there's a strong family history of depression and life events. So when I say life events, you know, loss, grievances, possible trauma, things that are really stressful to a person that have happened, unfortunately. Another thing to think about is personality traits. So if you have quite neurotic personality, anxiety-filled, impulsive or obsessive traits, that can increase your risk. Social circumstances. So there was a study by Brown and Harris that identified risk factors of lower class women, and they were just looking at this, so being who are unemployed, lack of confiding relationship, have lost their mum before the age of 11 themselves, and have 3 or more kids under the age of 14. And all of these factors there's an increased risk factor for women of this certain lower class that they could be prone to depression because of these different factors. And also in older people, so older than 65, for example, if they have social isolation or sensory deprivation, such as they're blind, deaf, sort of medical health problems, they can increase their risk of having depression, and having depressive episode. Another thing to think about, and this is quite obvious really, if you have physical illness such as cancer, if you've had a heart attack, you're more prone. I mean, that just makes sense, doesn't it? You're not going to be happy if you've been diagnosed with cancer.
Guess what, everyone? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's horrific diagnosis, and that can increase your risk of depression and having a depressive episode. And I want people to know, so cardiovascular disease, having that can lead to you having depression. Equally, vice versa, if you have depression, that can increase your risk of cardiovascular disease.
Really?
Okay? Yeah, so something to think about. Relationships, so it's been seen, especially with men who are of a certain age, and if they've been divorced or separated from their partner, might be more increased risk of having a depressive episode rather than men of the same age who are married. And gender. So depression is twice more likely and common in women than men. All right.
Wow.
So now I want to talk about suicide here. So suicide rate over time, it seems to be increasing. Okay. Not drastically, but it is increasing. And I want to talk about the suicide difference between men and women.
Yeah.
So even though depression is more high risk with women, you will find that men are more likely to commit suicide than women because of depression. And the reasons are, we think, because when women try to commit suicide, they're more likely to take, say, overdoses of medication like paracetamol or something. And that's why when you go to shops, you can't buy large amount of paracetamols. Okay, so there's a set number you can only buy because of the risk of overdoses, and obviously children getting hold of them. Whereas men, when they are set in their mind to commit suicide, they're more likely to be successful because they take more aggressive forms. So they're less likely to do overdoses, and they're more likely to do such as hanging. Okay, and that's actually one of the top reasons. So they take more aggressive stance to commit suicide, whereas women not so much so. And 3/4 of suicide are actually men compared to women.
Wow, that's incredible. Just the number difference.
Yeah, and going on to that, suicide is the second leading cause of death between 15 to 29-year-olds, and 800,000 approximately people die of suicide every year.
Wow.
So it's a huge number. So
it?
When people, this is why I get cross, because people don't take this seriously and judge others with it, but it is incredibly dangerous. That's why I say it's like a mind cancer. I mean, it's not cancer, but it's incredibly dangerous. And people really need to support those that have depression, because this is not a laughing matter.
No, not at all. Yeah, oh my goodness. I really am kind of shocked at those numbers.
You expected it to be less.
I did, yeah. And also the fact that it is so much higher in men because of I don't want to say method, but because of the way that they have decided to go towards the suicide. It's, as you say, it's that more aggressive. In some ways, if someone has taken a lot of pills, there is time to do something about that, whereas there is a lot less time to do something if someone tries to hang themselves. It's just I am kind of shocked.
It is quite shocking, actually, when you give the hard sort of factual figures about it. No, I do agree with you, and it's also rising, and it is shocking.
Again, I was going to say, I can't believe it's rising. I think that's extremely sad.
And I think people don't talk about it, actually. People quite embarrassed, I think, and stigmatized when they talk about depression. I've noticed that quite a lot, actually. So I have a family member, and they're male and they're over 50, and they've only recently felt safe enough to tell people they're going through depression. They've been suffering alone, and that's the worst possible thing, but people are really uncomfortable talking about it, and people don't talk about it and shy away from that topic because of the stigma. So it's something that we really need to break in, especially with men, because they're more likely to commit suicide. And I mean, I hate to controversial stereotype, but men aren't as great at talking therapy than women can be, and that's very controversial. I know what I'm saying, but
no, I can understand. I mean, there's, just thinking of my own anecdotal evidence, there's me who has emotions coming out of everywhere, and in comparison there's Lawrence, who at times just sits and goes, I don't know what I'm feeling, I might be sad, might not be, I don't know. And so for him at the moment, it's him trying to get back in touch with his emotions, probably because of the way that I reacted. Any kind of slight showing of emotion from him made me react in a destructive manner. But as a result of me getting to the point in my therapy where I've gone, I have done as much as I can do on my own, I think there may be something that you need to do about it. He's now gone into compassion therapy, compassion focused, I think it is. Is that the one? Compassion focused therapy. It's something that was suggested by my therapist to help him because he has been so guarded with everything, and I don't think he's had any support really, because he's had to deal with me, and let's be honest, I'm not the easiest person in the world to live with. So And it's taken several years for me to encourage him to maybe he needs some additional help and support, because I don't know, men just don't talk about it with other men, whereas again,
it's more acceptable with women, isn't it, to talk about
things. We sit down, we have a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and cake in some people's cases. Not mine. No, never cake. But I mean, I'm quite happily sit down and have a chat with Becky about how we're feeling and stuff, whereas men seem to try and keep it at arm's length. And I'm not saying this is all men.
Yeah, no, of course.
But there's this kind of taboo around it, isn't there? You can't, as a man, you can't have emotion.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few friends who, well, I mean, obviously I have friends, but I mean, I have a few friends that are male.
No, obviously you have no friends. You're my only friend.
But no, I have friends, but I have friends that are male and a few of them that I was trying to say, I know that have had issues with grievances and depression, and they still haven't sought any help, and it's because I don't know if it's within themselves, but I remember when I spoke to one of them, they felt it was a weakness, and they were very disappointed in themselves and just very harsh on themselves. And I mean, you can't be harsh, you can't help it. If it happens, it happens, you know, there's nothing you can do about it. But that needs to come from with yourself, and you need to accept that. And people need to be a bit more supportive as well, and encourage people that it's okay to talk and it's safe to talk. And there's no stigma. And like in that first episode I did read about stigma, it's okay. And I think it needs a bit more sensitivity around men, that it is okay for them to come forward, and you're still a man and you still be respected, and it's fine.
It doesn't take anything away from you if you're a man that is needing emotional support or is talking about their mental health. I mean, I think everyone should be talking about their mental health, because there are obviously times when you need some additional support, but there are also times when life is going good and everything's happy. And for me, I find it very difficult to identify the happy just generally. But if I could see that in other people, then I would be able to start to model that. Does that make sense?
You mentioned self-harm and things like this, so I wanted to touch on that.
Yes, please.
So if you have had previous self-harm and suicidal ideation and attempts to commit suicide, then
that'd be me. Just saying. That's me. Yep. That's me.
So you're at increased risk of future attempts also, and having future depressive episodes. Now, having depression, I always say nothing is completely curable, you know, but it's maintaining it. But that doesn't mean you won't have a relapse. So it's all about, I always say this, knowing what your triggers are, your relapses, what sets you off, what makes you more depressed, and making sure. So this is why I love mindfulness, because it comes in all different shapes and forms. So it doesn't have to be, you know, mindfulness, listening to something called mindfulness, or doing meditation. People do it in different ways, and that's okay. So some people, washing their dishes is incredibly therapeutic for them. Washing their clothes, cleaning is really, in a way, mindful for them, and doing mindfulness. So I always say this, incorporate this every single day. And even people without depression do this without even realizing they're doing it. So, you know, for me to really relax, I write. So that is my therapeutic out, you know, making me feel better. And I do that anyway. I don't have depression, but I do it anyway, and it makes me feel really good. So other people, it might be exercise, it might be the gym, it might be meditation, it might be if they're religious, it might be yoga. You know, it comes in all different shapes and sizes. And I think later on we're going to talk about a running mindfulness. So it comes in all different ways. So it's really important to do this daily, and then you're more likely to keep the beast of depression away, I think, and really maintain it. Now, certain clues that you can be thinking that someone's going to commit suicide is if they've tied up their finances, so they've closed their bank account, or they've transferred money to somebody, if they've obviously written a suicide letter, if you've noticed that the cabinet of medication have gone, if you've noticed they've just sort of sorted out certain affairs, like they've got things sorted out at work, or quit their job, or they, you know, just certain things they've just put an end to, if they're obviously talking in a very, what you think is is in a depressed, suicidal way. There's certain things as well. And people who are isolated, they could be an increased risk as well because they're isolated, they don't have that support network also. And interestingly, in prisoners, you're more likely to kill yourself if you're on remand. And obviously, if you have a single cell to yourself, okay, that's something to keep in mind. And there's a myth that prisoners who have sort of a lifelong sentence or are there chronically are more likely to commit suicide than those not. That's actually not true. And we touched on the first podcast I did with you, but if you talk about suicide, that does not increase your risk of someone wanting to commit suicide. It's not like you give them an idea to commit suicide. That's not how it works. So that myth is not true. Now, when you're depressed, you are at increased risk of self-harming. What self-harming is inflicting some sort of physical damage, shall I say, onto yourself. It might be your attempt to commit suicide that failed. Okay, so you might have taken an overdose of paracetamol and that failed. That's self-harming then, with an intent to commit suicide. It's just that it didn't pass. Some people might cut. And that self-harming doesn't always lead to them wanting to commit suicide. It might be that's a way for them to cope, that they hide it from other people. That's what it was for me. Okay, so it's a way to just deal with what's going on. And it's quite common, actually, especially with young adults, adolescents, because they don't know how to express themselves with other people, how to talk about it, because it's difficult for adults to talk about it. So it's very difficult for children as well and adolescents. So they might do that kind of behaviour. Also taking substances, that's a way of self-harming as well. Drinking alcohol, I'll give you a stereotypical image, a man at a pub who's really depressed drinking himself sorrow, basically. So that's a form of self-harm as well. And you're more likely to repeat self-harm if you have a history of it. And that's just obvious, really. Now, I obviously, because I work in psychiatry, I see the most severest forms of depression. And normally it's because they've been brought in by a member of the public. And, working in London, I get a lot of referrals urgently that people are trying to step on the tracks. So if you ever see that, please always be the good person you want. Make sure you get that person off the track, or if you feel like they're about to jump, please don't. And this happens daily. So I have these patients every single day that come in, and it's usually social circumstance and something has triggered their depression, and they just feel so worthless and they just have no hope of the future, and they don't want this, but they see no way out. And there's a big ethical debate about euthanasia, and I know in certain places it's legal and here it's not. There's been such big conversation about it actually recently. I mean, this is a huge topic, but one thing I think that needs to be considered, that I don't agree with euthanasia happening if you haven't ruled out organic causes such as depression.
That makes sense.
Because depression, yes, it's not that it's not curable, but you can get out of it. And so why would you euthanize someone when there is hope? And when I see these patients, I always try to encourage them that there is hope, that this will pass, and it will pass. I'm such a big believer in that. And it has passed. And I do see my patients and it passes.
It's passed for me.
Brilliant. Good.
Well, it has at the moment. So I recently went on the NHS website, and you can take a questionnaire that will tell you.
Is this the Beck's Depression Inventory? Or?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. It's on the NHS website. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But for the first time in I don't know how long, I've actually took the test and it came back saying that I wasn't depressed. And just because it says that I'm not depressed currently doesn't mean that I'm going to go and stop taking my medication, because I do take medication for depression, but it's a positive because at this point in time, I don't feel depressed.
Good. I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, so there definitely is hope out there. And as you say, you obviously see the patients that are at their worst kind of depression, so feel like it's not ever going to end, but yet they are also able to get out of it and see the light.
A really interesting something I read years ago. So in wartime, in the past, the actual rate of suicide was actually decreased. And I mean, some people find that surprising. And the reason was because people had hope that,
just going to say decreased.
Yeah. So people had, come together in that community in that time of, that intense world status. So people came together and there was that support system. So it was actually decreased in that time, which I thought was just a really interesting historical fact, actually.
Yeah, that is really interesting because, you would think the opposite.
I wanted to say something about depression as well. And I said this in my first podcast with you about stigma. Now, mental health affects 1 in 4 people. Okay. No one is immune to it. I always say this. And I will never forget a case I saw actually of a woman. And again, not going into details to protect her confidentiality. But what had happened, and I think this is really important to remember those that are not suffering with mental health at the moment, that you can still get it. Okay. And essentially, and I'm changing some of the facts of what happened with this woman to protect her identity and etc. So this was a female that was, in quoted brackets, normal. Okay. Normal childhood, quite a happy person, happily married, quite thriving off life, traveller, enjoyed hanging out with her friends, relatively really happy, and never had mental health problems. And she was savagely raped. Okay. Very brutally. It was absolutely horrific, and she will always stay with me forever just because her story really affected me. And because of this, she got depression, and it completely changed her life. She was self-harming, obviously depressed. She couldn't be around those individuals that looked like the perpetrators, and it really affected her health. And now, unfortunately, she's a mental health patient in services. So it can happen to absolutely anyone for any cause and trigger. And that's why I always say depression is like a mind cancer. It can overtake anybody, just like cancer. No one is immune to cancer.
Yeah.
Okay. And it can happen to anyone. And it is the most sad, I think it's one of the most sad diagnoses I have to make on a patient. It really, really upsets me because it is so dangerous, and how your mind makes your body feel and how your body affects your mind with depression. And it is absolutely terrifying, and it can kill you.
Yeah. I think that's the sad reality, isn't it? Is that this is that serious that it can result in a person's death.
Yeah.
And
but
gosh,
I always
really
like to be optimistic. So anyone listening and suffering with this, you can come out of it, please. Like, as I said, do things that make you happy. Everyone is so different. So what makes me happy might be different to you. And writing for me might bore other people. So whatever makes you happy, do it. And I wrote an article, and I really love this article I wrote because so I'm going to ask you, Sydney, can you give me an example that made you really happy as an activity when you were a child?
Okay, as a child. Oh, now you're asking.
The pressure.
The pressure. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, this is bad.
It's hard when you put on the spot, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm like, oh no.
I could just hear your brain slugging away.
Yeah, can you hear it?
Yeah.
One thing that I enjoyed as a child was when we used to go on holidays, we used to go in a caravan, and because there's not a lot you can do in a caravan, we used to get bought these kind of like word search puzzles, and I loved them. I would sit for hours doing word search. Don't get me wrong, I couldn't read the words. But it's good because you just pattern match and it's fine. So yeah, that's probably one of the things that I remember as a child that I really enjoyed.
Brilliant. So I wrote this article about, so every time I look at children, I mean, majority, they're just so happy. They're just smiling. And I'm just looking at them like, oh, you're having so much fun. And I don't know what happens in your life when you have to suddenly not be that child anymore, doing silly things and become this boring adult. Like, I don't know where that came from. And there's a reason why adults now incorporate these fun activities. So like trampoline classes, these fun cycling classes. And some of them, have water sprays and all these funny lights. And, it's so much fun. And so I wrote this article saying, basically, incorporate what you think a child would do in your life. So get a trampoline. It's not just for the kids, it's for the adults. And no one says that it's not, for adults as well. And there's a reason we love doing these things and being silly, because silly just makes you so happy. So
definitely. If
you imagine like children, little girls use a skipping rope, but wait, adults use it too. People enjoy this kind of thing.
Hula hoop.
So that is my thing. So I was about to say it. Hula hoop is my thing. Like, you can't take that, Sydney, it's mine.
Is it?
So I get so happy when I hula hoop, and I don't really care. Yes, I'm a working doctor. It makes me so happy. And there's a reason, certain places in London people want to go to, so like Bounce. So it's ping pong table. Like, it's because it's fun. It's silly. You're doing fun activities, whatever it is. Everyone's different. So for me, it's hula hooping. For you, it's the puzzles. For another child, it might be roller skating. I mean, there's a reason there's these things all the time. You can go rollerblading. I mean, people enjoy this.
I must admit, for me, it's definitely more because I also suffer with dyspraxia, so my coordination isn't 100%. So the amount of times I ended up in hospital because I'd fallen off of something or almost broken something, because they used to joke that I would have a reserved parking space at my local accident and emergency department because I was there that often.
Oh God.
But like at the weekend, I took my nephews and my niece to soft play, and my brother-in-law was like, they have soft play for adults.
Yes, I've been to them.
Now. You can go
absolutely loved it.
You can go sit in the ball pit, run around.
But that's why.
I was like,
you see little puppies doing it, you see children doing it, and why can't you do it? I don't know where it came in our life that for some reason you're not meant to do these things. Whoever said that? It's not a law. It's not illegal. So I wrote this article, and anyone please read it.
I will also go get it.
It's so short. It's just basically a list of things to help you get out of depression, and it's essentially fun ways to do it like a child. So hopping, skipping, it's so varied. Everyone's different, but I really encourage people to try and do this. You can even do it at home if you're worried that people are looking at you. You don't have to go outside, because I know people don't like doing things outside where people might judge them or criticize them. So you can do these things at home, and they're so easy, and they make you so happy. I mean, there's a reason people listen to music, it makes them happy, and only you're listening to that music. You have headphones. It's not like anyone else can hear it, so you can be listening to, who knows, I'm a Barbie in the Barbie's world, who knows,
Barbie girl.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Can't go wrong with a bit of Barbie
right
girl.
So whatever makes you happy, and I really encourage doing silly activities, because that's more likely to make you laugh and be happy.
Do you know what I did the other day that I hadn't done for years that I thought was the best thing ever?
Oh my gosh, what?
I went to Crazy Golf.
Oh,
that was fun.
I love Crazy Golf. I love these kind of things.
I was rubbish. And it's when the 10, 11-year-old and the 4, 5-year-old is better than you at the Crazy Golf that you're just like, you know what, I don't care. So we were like literally going along, and like we would nudge the ball and stuff. Oh,
brilliant.
Gone in.
But that's exactly what you should do, and it makes you happy, doesn't it?
It was hilarious.
So there we go. And that lifts your mood. I mean, it lifts my mood just talking about these things. I mean, just doing it. There we go. And there's, people go surfing or whatever it is, like wherever you are, there's always something, and it's free. So most of these things are free. You don't even have to pay, so there's no excuse. And so you don't need to worry about the expensive, because children have fun, and it's not that they've got money. It's just they're using what they have there. Even a piece of chalk and playing a game on the floor, like you can do so much with very little resources, and it's so easy. And something I do like on a weekly basis, I set like 20 minutes when I'm home alone, and I put like music on, and I pretend I'm in a really cool club, and like I do it in my pajamas at home, and I just dance like a crazy person all over the place, on the sofas, off the sofas, acting like Rihanna or Beyonce, whatever it is. In reality, it's like SpongeBob or something, but it really lifts your mood. I love SpongeBob.
Aww.
So doing these things, it's just so easy and simple.
Yes, I must admit, myself and Becky were talking about, so she is, well, we both kind of are, but she's a massive fan of Grey's Anatomy.
Like dreamy.
You know when Christina...
I know what you're doing. I know what you're thinking.
Christina and Meredith dance it out.
Exactly, but there you go.
Yeah. And you're like, that's what we need to do.
Like
but McDreamy. Oh, he died.
They just like killed them. They all
died, didn't they?
Believe
Sorry, spoiler alert.
No, but they just killed them all off, and it's like, why? They were so nice on the eye. Like, don't get rid of them.
Exactly, bring them back.
No, but that's exactly it. So dancing therapy, there's so many different therapies, pet therapy, laughing therapy, there's so much, but it's just basically doing an activity, and that is your therapy. So make it individual to you, whatever you like.
That sounds like really good advice. Now, I know we were talking about, obviously, the controversy associated with 13 Reasons Why. The 8th of March, from the Daily Mail, the headline, Girl 13 hanged herself the day after she pretended to take her own life in a school prank related to Netflix teen suicide show 13 Reasons Why. So, a 13-year-old who they believe had watched the 13 Reasons Why Netflix TV show was part of a prank at her school where they basically used toilet tissue and made a noose and put it around her neck and took a video of her. And then the next day she actually did follow that through with taking her own life. So it looks like there was some bullying, unfortunately, going on for this poor girl. I don't think it would have been as a result of this TV show.
I think it's a really poor headline because it's trying to influence people thinking that showing suicide or talking about suicide increases other people's chance. And we know that's not even true. And I think with this case, obviously, I don't know the particular case, I didn't assess it, but no one self-harms or commits suicide if there isn't something going on, if they don't have depressive symptoms. Happy people, I mean obviously bipolar, but I'm not going into that, but as in you don't do these things lightheartedly. There's something going on, and it seems like there's other things with this young girl. But it's very, very sad. But I've heard cases of girls at school and boys that are so stressed in their exam that they've committed suicide by putting pencils in their nose and slamming their head on the table. Like, horrid. People don't talk about it, and because who really wants to read such a horrific case? I mean, there's so much anyway in the world, but so very sad, especially at such a young age when your whole life is ahead of you.
It just makes me so sad that obviously there are people that still think that suicide is their only option.
No.
And their only viable option.
And this is why I said in the first podcast with you about stigma, I really feel there needs to be more education, especially in school, because children need to grow up understanding mental health, and they don't, clearly they don't, and they don't know how to talk about it or what's quoted normal or not, and what to do in these situations and who to talk to. And that's the biggest thing. They don't know who to talk to, and they just feel there's no way out. They're going to be in this forever. And especially when you're at that age, you're going through all these like growing up life decisions. You feel that everything is happening is life, and that is the end result. And it's really hard for people to maturely think this is not life, and that distortion of cognitive distortion, and think this is something going on, some sort of stress or whatever it is, and that it will get better and this will pass. And it's very difficult at that age to realise that.
Definitely. And I also think I think in some ways parents have got it tough, particularly with teenagers, because teenagers don't necessarily want to share with their parents things like that. And I think that's probably the toughest part, because you get the typical teenager. I know what I was like if someone asked me how I was, I'd be like, fine, kind of thing. Yeah. And I wouldn't talk about it, even though I was more than likely depressed back then. And we need to be arming teenagers with this knowledge that if you can't go to your parents, you don't feel comfortable, that there is someone else out there that will listen to them.
No, I absolutely agree.
And I think it's tough, isn't it? Because as a parent, you want to engage your child with these things, but then you also know that there's going to be this, I don't know, I think it's typical teenage behaviour, isn't it? This kind of holding stuff back and not admitting. I mean, we spoke on other podcasts where I, as a teenager, self-harmed, and I secretly ate, and I did all of these things, and I don't think I ever told my parents.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very individual as well. I mean, when I was at school, I was bullied actually, but I was. Oh no. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. I mean, I physically was fine, but I was really.
But it's still not nice.
No, it's not nice. But I was very lucky because the person I spoke to and I was able to, and I had that link with, was my mum. And if I didn't have her, and I had that relationship with her, not everyone has that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I didn't have that. Exactly. And not everyone's life's different. So I was very lucky. But if I didn't have that relationship with my mum, that I felt comfortable enough to talk to somebody, I don't know what the consequences would have been. I might not be the person I am today. So I really think, especially at that age, because you're going through knowing who you are, you're trying to be an adult. It's a very awkward age because you're trying to get rid of that childhood you, become this adult. And meanwhile, you're going through all these horrible biological changes as well. It's such a difficult time, and there's a lot of pressure anyway, because you have to make big life decisions about what you're going to do in life and things like that, and who you surround yourself with is really important. And unfortunately, so I went to a girls' school, and girls aren't that nice actually when they're teenagers. They're quite unpleasant. No. And I definitely wouldn't want to go back to being at a girls' school at that age, because people are trying to find who they are, and people can be nasty, and that's not the case with everyone, but it's a really difficult age, and it's so common children have suicidal ideation and adolescents, and it's really difficult. And if you don't have that support system in whatever way or form, it worries me what the consequences could be, really. So there does need to be support, I think, in school and that education, because that's where the child spends most of their time anyway, if they're, not at home. It is horrible, and I think it does affect everyone.
Yeah. Well, thank you once again for coming onto the podcast and talking to us today about depression. I found it fascinating and I have learnt a lot. I hope everyone at home has enjoyed this episode as well. If you have any additional questions about anything that you would like to ask the Secret Psychiatrist, please get in contact with us. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and at our website, which is mentalhealthbookclub.com. Equally, you can reach out directly to the Secret Psychiatrist, which you can find on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, at her website, thesecretpsychiatrist.com. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please share that with your family and friends and let them know about the Mental Health Book Club. And we hope that you all have a fantastic week, and we'll be back next week. And remember, it's okay to not be okay, and if you're not okay, talk. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you need additional help with your mental health, please contact the Samaritans on 116 123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next book will be Clown and I, Riding the Wildling Spirit, a bipolar memoir by Ryan Heffernan. And our next episode with the Secret Psychiatrist will be on bipolar disorder. If you'd like to find out more about the MHBC podcast, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We really hope that you enjoy this podcast, and we would like to hear what you think. Please head over to Twitter and follow us at MHBC_podcast, or head over to Facebook and follow our Facebook page, which is Mental Health Book Club. If you would like to show your support further, please share us with your family and friends and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. We are now on Patreon. Please head over to patreon.com/MHBC to donate as little as $2 a month to the Mental Health Book Club podcast. As a result of your donation, you will get early access to some of our episodes, you will get specific episodes that are only for patrons, and you'll be eligible to be entered into free prize draws.